I think it was about 11:30 at night. I get up very early to go to work, so I get in bed early. I was asleep. And I heard something, like a train or in Niagara Falls, something like that. And it just penetrated my consciousness and started to awaken me. When all of a sudden there was this gigantic explosion. And that was the rear French doors of our house being blown open by the mud flow, the water flow, confluence of both. I came down the stairs, and when I hit the floor, I was up to my knees in this disgusting, muddy, dense water. I came to the front of the house, and he was able to force open the French doors in the front, opening a flow so the water could come in the rear and out the front. So it was probably 8 to 10 miles an hour going through the house. Which it must have been a hell of a sight from down below. I didn't see it, but I saw from the top was the water coming through the house and actually cascading over the deck.
The shock was there was a community here, which we knew of. I believe there's 10 homes that were buried, and it was just what happened to this neighborhood. Gone. The slide came down, hit the bank, and all the trees and rocks actually flew and landed in this whole area here. And this is Love Creek. And about where the telephone pole is, the debris was gathered up at least 20 feet of rocks and logs, and that's way up to that height. It was at that height right up here where the road takes the upgrade. That was the height of this whole thing. So we had to get over all these rocks to get up to where we had victims and homes that came down through the slide.
I wasn't really nervous about anything happening that night necessarily, but Cindy, the lady who lived in this house, was nervous, and actually that night she slept in the living room close to the exit of the house, and because she was afraid something was going to happen, and had asked Paul to sleep in the living room with her because she felt that something bad was going to happen, and sure enough, she was right. I was aware of debris flows, the possibility of them happening, but you never think anything's ever going to happen to you or to someone that you know directly. Like something like this here, I mean, there was a small draw here that in '82 had a little slide, but nothing, just a little bit of mud came down the hill. Never thought that the whole mountain, well, the portion of the hillside was going to come through and wipe out your friend's house. Cindy, she's not really sure how she got out. She got thrown clear of the house somehow, and it looks like it went through a rock tumbler is what it looks like. Everything's just kind of mixed up and in a pile. Where's the guy going to be that's just gone through that? You just start moving stuff and calling out his name, hoping that you'll hear him say something, and hoping you don't find him underneath something. You're hoping, the whole time when I was moving stuff, I was hoping that he wasn't going to be there. Just don't be under what I'm lifting up right now. And luckily he wasn't, but unfortunately it didn't matter. The damage was done to him.
The San Francisco Bay Area actually is an ideal habitat for landslides, both shallow and deep. We have a combination of steep slopes, weak rocks, and very intense winter rainstorms. There are two different kinds of landslides in the Bay Area, debris flows and deep-seated slides. The debris flows are relatively small, they're shallow, they occur during periods of heavy rainfall, but they can occur quite suddenly and move very rapidly. And this rapid movement makes them very dangerous. They can not only destroy property, they can actually kill people. The deep-seated landslides, on the other hand, are larger, deeper, and tend to occur more slowly and gradually and move more slowly. So they're much less dangerous to life and limb, but they can still cause an enormous amount of property damage.
In early January 1982, a single catastrophic rainstorm stalled over the San Francisco Bay Area for 32 hours, dropping as much as half the region's annual precipitation. The record-breaking storm fell on waterlogged ground already saturated from 2 months of unusually heavy rainfall. The combination of soaked soils and torrential rains triggered widespread flooding and devastating landslides in an area extending 200 miles north of San Francisco and 100 miles south. In all, 6,300 homes, 1,500 businesses, and tens of kilometers of roads, bridges, and utility lines were damaged by the 82 storm. Mountain dwellers were cut off from outside help for more than a week. At the height of the deluge, more than 4,000 sought refuge in 45 Red Cross evacuation centers. Storm damages were estimated at $300 million. Ironically, the most deadly hazard of the storm had not been considered a regional danger prior to January of '82. Of the 33 deaths attributed to the '82 storm, 25 were caused by debris flows. Although the shallow, fast-moving slides had been recognized locally and were not uncommon, their potential for widespread and devastating impact had not been fully realized. During the January '82 storm, 18,000 landslides were generated throughout the 10-county Bay region. The most destructive of these slides affected 25 acres in the Love Creek area of the Santa Cruz Mountains. Pounded by 19 inches of rain, a 1,000-foot slab of heavily wooded hill slope carrying over 500,000 cubic meters of earth and rock debris crashed down without warning on sleeping residents of Love Creek Heights. 4 people in the immediate path of the landslide narrowly survived the disaster, but 10 of their neighbors were killed. Search parties recovered 6 of the bodies, but 4, including those of 2 young boys, 7 and 5, have never been found and are presumed buried in the toe of the slide.
Not only did we have the problem with the slide, which devastated this community, we had a lake up here. The slide came down and dammed up Love Creek. We had 2 homes up here that were actually flooded and underwater. The water got to be about 20, 30 feet deep up here, so we had to dive into the homes and actually swim around the house so we could find any bodies, which we didn't. But there were 2 homes underwater up here, and that was kind of added to the disaster. For the first 3 days we were running, the community really came together, and we had approximately 300 volunteers every day that we brought up here and managed, and we had to do everything by hand, picks and shovels, chainsaws, and it was a concerted effort at first to see if we could, of course, try to find survivors.
Karen Wallingford, he was right back here, right in that area. It's grown over, and she was pinned to an old chimney, and she was flat against the chimney. It was right up against her cheek, and her arm was pinned under her, and it shut off the circulation for I don't know how many hours. And the only thing I could see when I walked in through here was her hair. She had lots of hair. She was asleep in the part of the landslide, not the main force, that pushed her right through from one end of the bedroom out the back wall. And he just rode the forward part of it. She woke up and she was flying through the bedroom. And she came to rest against the old chimney. Firemen came up and cut it away and pulled her out of there and took her out down Vineland on a stretcher. And that's how her mother actually saw if she was all right, saw her on the news on the East Coast. Her mother lives in Massachusetts. And so she saw her daughter coming out on TV. The landslide, as you can see, it's the area to the left, the bigger one. It was all that area, which is now grown over quite a bit. But down below it in the heavier wooded areas where most of the houses were. And at the time it seemed like the whole hill had come down, mountain hill. And there was just nothing but rubble. They said a mudslide, but it was more trees, chunks of rock, debris, houses, refrigerators. The former heavy forest was just gone. Substantial redwoods, eucalyptus, just gone. And the total silence. There's no birds, nothing. No one ever considered that something like this would happen. The people that I lived with there just considered it another heavy rainstorm where there was no power, possibly the road washing out, and they went back to bed. And unfortunately, that was the last thing they did.
You know, what was really, you read about how animals have got this sense and they could hear earthquakes coming and have some kind of mechanism that warns them for humans. But what we found on two of the families, two of the homes where people perished, and two of them, well, one of them, the debris came down and crushed the home, and we found the victims in bed. And in the bed sleeping on the bed was a dog. It looked like in the same position as if it, it came so quick it didn't warn the dog. And another one we found, the woman was actually sitting on a couch and a tree came through and crushed her, and she had her cat on her lap. And the log came through and crushed the cat and her both. So it came so quickly that the animals had no warning either. And you read about how animals can sense these things before humans can. But it came so fast that it was just amazing. They had no warning either.
There are a couple things that make debris flow very dangerous. One is the speed. They can move quite quickly, far faster than I can run or most people can run. Another thing that makes them dangerous is that they happen very suddenly. There's often little or no warning. 1 minute, the hill slope will look completely undisturbed, nice green grass, unbroken. And a few minutes later, it's many tons of this mud-like slurry flowing rapidly down the hill. The final thing that makes them so dangerous is the weight. Mud seems like such a benign material, but it's actually very heavy. A cubic yard of mud weighs over 1.5 tons. And so the masses that you see from the slides that you see behind me are probably averaging a couple thousand cubic yards apiece. So now you're talking about many thousands of tons of earth material moving at speeds of up to 25, 30 miles an hour. It's basically the same momentum as a runaway freight train and about the same destructive capability. After storm events, which generate a lot of debris flows, we often get a question about the areas that are in the debris flow scars. These scars are the debris flows that happen that season. And the question usually is some variation of, well, now that all the dirt's come out of this place, is it safe now? Unfortunately, the answer is no, you can't rest safely because often the area around the debris flow scar, that is the adjacent area, will be destabilized and could go in a future storm. Also, these scars that are left behind tend to fill in fairly quickly within a few years. They can basically reload. Like lightning, debris flows do strike twice in the same place.
Behind me is the abated area, and I believe there's 20 homes back here that after the geologists came into the area, they found another crack on the ridge up here, which they state the next major storm, there'd be another slide area and take out this other half of the community. So the county abated the area, and these poor folks had to move out of their homes. You can see one up here. It's a very nice community.
In the spring of 1997, 15 years after the Love Creek tragedy, conditions were brewing off the west coast of South America for a repeat of a magnitude 82 storm.
Batten down the hatches. El Niño's on the way. There's a good chance it may be a very wet winter.
Media warnings forecasting the coming of the strongest El Niño weather disturbance of the 20th century began in the summer of '97. El Niño was predicted to take the Bay Area by unprecedented storm and associated floods, landslides, and coastal erosion during the '97-'98 winter. By early February 1998, rainfall totals had reached 166% of normal. If a record storm did hit the Bay region, hillsides were sure to slide. Despite the warnings, the lessons of Love Creek and the '82 storm had faded. Most residents were more concerned with trees falling and roadways flooding than hillsides giving way. The night of February 2nd, as predicted, El Niño struck with devastating force. Patty Mayall was at a business meeting in San Jose the night of the February 2nd storm, a relatively safe haven from her rural home in an isolated mountain canyon along Old La Honda Road in the Santa Cruz Mountains. But she was desperate to get home, knowing that the storm would hit twice as hard in the mountains where she lived than in the flatlands where she worked. Her partner, Ted, was home alone, several miles from the nearest community along a precipitous route that wound through a dense redwood forest before descending 300 feet down a canyon wall. Patty drove north along Highway 280 through driving wind and rain, only to be turned away by a torrent of water running down Highway 84 as she attempted to reach Skyline Drive.
I was trying to get home, and it was kind of crazy. I don't think you should be on a road when it's like that, but I just wanted to get home. But to see all that water and to know that it was probably even worse here and not to be able to get here, it was just a terrible situation, and to be so close to home but not be able to get home.
Patty Mayall was forced to drive back into town to spend the night. She was able to make one call to her partner Ted before the phone lines went dead, only to discover that not one, but several, a swarm of mudslides, were on the move and threatening to wipe out their home. In near synchronicity, hillsides throughout the central Santa Cruz Mountains let loose between 11 p.m. the night of the February 2nd storm and 1 a.m. the following morning.
He wasn't in a panic, but he was definitely fighting it, and I was really worried about him being alone and being outside and that anything could happen. But, I mean, you suddenly realize, you know, you're on your own. He's on his own, I'm on my own, and nobody can really help us.
It was dark, it was pouring rain. I kept trying to divert the water to go down the road and not come onto the property. All I knew for sure was it was changing constantly around me. There was one debris float on one side of me and one on the other side with a space of maybe, 60 feet between us. And beyond that 60 feet towards 84, there was another, 50 yards of debris flow that I couldn't see. I did hear one tree come down while I was up there. I don't know where that tree came down. I wasn't able to see it. All I could see was what I was battling directly in front of the house. So I didn't see any of that until, I guess, daylight. And then even then I didn't go into it because it was flowing. It was still coming across the road. It completely covered the road. There was no way in or out of that.
When I came out onto Old La Honda, where you can see down into the canyon that we live in, I was just amazed. It was a whole different landscape from when I left Monday. I saw the huge slide that was just maybe 100 feet down from where our house is. I saw that missed the house. I couldn't see the house from the top of the road, but I saw the smoke signal, which was a real smoke signal for me, saying that he was alive and keeping the fire going, so he must be okay. And I just thanked God a million times. And as I drove down, I saw the various slides on the hills around us, but I was amazed that we at least had this access, because I knew we wouldn't have access down to 84. And I was just so grateful that our house was okay.
From that night forward, for the next 4 days, was just a total sense of urgency. It kept raining and kept raining, and so I kept walking the property and cutting little drainage ditches wherever I could. And as the days went on, I kind of figured out more where the water was going, where it wanted to go, where I could drain more water and where I couldn't. And so in just a sentence, it was just a total sense of urgency the entire time until the county got to us on Friday. Then we felt a little better,
Other mountain residents were waging their own battles with debris flows during the night of the February 2nd storm. In the Dearborn Park neighborhood, 5 miles from the drowned coastal town of Pescadero, a torrent of mud and debris crashed through the rear French doors of Craig and Robin Powell's home. Their entire first floor was mired in the woody ooze, and a large portion of their possessions, computers, furniture, office files, were carried away with the debris-laden flow. Ironically, the stormwaters of '82, which triggered the Love Creek slide, flooded the Powell's former residence in Redwood City.
We started to grab things that were floating out, throwing them up on high surfaces, so we would reduce our losses somewhat. Did that for probably an hour, doing the best we could to save as much as we could. And Robin at that point was getting quite anxious about being in the house. The storm was very, very violent. Trees were coming down everywhere. We had 2 girls who were asleep in the 2nd floor. And I think Robin started to worry about their safety. So about 2:30 in the morning, the water flow had gone down quite a bit. So we got the girls up and out, and we hiked down to some friends in Lower Dearborn to spend the rest of the night there. I didn't get back up here until, it must have been 5:30 or 6 o'clock, the next morning. The water was still coming through our house, but the mud had settled into a very solid 10-inch mass of redwood trees and dirt and rock. Shoveling it out was a very strange experience because you're shoveling limbs out of your house.
At the Krause Ranch, just outside the eclectic artist haven of La Honda, a 200-foot slide scraped between the Krause's house and barn, engulfing their deck post and slightly damaging the barn. The slide wiped out all the Krause's water lines and pushed their truck and horse trailer 60 feet from where the vehicles had been parked at the base of the failed slope. The stability of the hill adjacent to the slide directly behind their home remains in question. As fortunate as the Krauses were not to have suffered more immediate damage, David and Marianne Connor's escape from a raging debris flow laden with mature redwood trees was nothing less than a miracle.
It was mainly like a typical winter day with the heavy rain, which we've had over the years, and it wasn't anything particularly that we were worried about, other than you're always worried about slides, but it was something that was in the back of our mind, but never thinking it was going to happen. But
I always thought of the trees falling, not a
maybe.
mudslide actually coming down.
Well, I think we did. I mean, I did, especially what was a few years ago at Santa Cruz, the Love Creek, is that what they called it? When that whole hillside slid. So it was in the back of my mind. It's a possibility, but after being here as long as we've had, as long as we've been here, and not having something like this happen, you feel a little safer. We had a little generator going in the garage here for some electricity in the house, and we had walked out to shut that generator off, and all within that same period of time, we started hearing a rumble. I heard a rumble and a roar over the little generator. Marianne.
I heard a big, like a clap of thunder or a big explosion is what I heard. A real loud noise.
I guess in the back of my mind, I was thinking if we should have to run, a safe place maybe be those trees down there, and you couldn't miss that the mountainside was coming, so I just said, let's run, and we ran down the driveway here about 30 yards and got behind those trees, and within 5 seconds of getting behind the trees, the whole thing, just like 100 locomotives coming down at us, hit the trees, and limbs were going over our heads, and we couldn't see because it was dark, and the noise over here, the whole thing was just a tremendous noise. I just had time to think and listen to the sound, and I said to myself, we're either going to be here when this is over, or the next thing I could feel would be mud and debris falling over us, and off we went into the creek. And then it was like, it all stopped. It was like dead silence, except for the creek, which was running quite heavily, and the rain was still coming down. Our guess is that a lot of these trees that piled in here perpendicular to the road or parallel to the road shot some of this mud off to this direction, and then that saved us. It just wasn't our time to go.
Luckily.
Yeah. So we're still here. Tell the story, I guess.
Yeah. It was quite a night.
And these guys were spoiled and in the house, so. And he's been eating well. So they all made it.
Yeah, we have one other cat.
Huh. Yeah, you made it.
Debris flows are most likely occur during heavy rainstorms, either during the storm itself or within a few hours after the storm. That's because it takes a lot of water in the soil to trigger one of these debris flows. The process by which rainfall triggers landslides is actually fairly simple. It's a matter of how fast the water goes into the ground from the rainfall versus how fast the water can drain out of the ground by gravitational drainage downslope. The topsoils in the Bay Area soak up water very easily, very nicely. They'll take rainfall amounts of ½ an inch an hour or more. However, underlying the topsoil, the bedrock is older, tighter, it is less permeable. It does not soak up water quite so well. And in a light rainfall, none of this is a problem because the water drains out downslope about as fast as the rain is falling in. However, if it starts raining very heavily and the water starts going into the soil faster than it can either drain into the bedrock or drain downslope, then what happens is we build up a zone of saturated soil in the topsoil, and as the zone of saturation builds up in the soil, the pressure of the water in the soil also builds up, and this water pressure weakens the soil. Actually, we'll turn it into a mud-like material. Also, it forces the grains of the soil apart so that the force of friction holding it on the hill is lessened. And if the rain falls hard enough, long enough, eventually the soil will become saturated enough and the pressures will be high enough that will actually trigger a movement of the soil downslope. The question of why some slopes fail catastrophically and others take several months or even years to come down is one that's still a frontier area of research in landslide geology. We know that it has to do with the materials that are involved, whether they're serpentines or sands or clays. We know it has to do with the slope angle, how steep the slope is. But exactly how these two factors interplay and exactly how it interacts with the water, we don't really know. Along a ridge, such as the one you see behind me, you'll see essentially the same slope, essentially the same soil type, and yet out of a half a dozen or more debris flows all in a row, 2 or 3 will have failed catastrophically, as you'll see long plumes of really fluid material coming out of them. And then interspersed one, it may be one where it's only slid a few feet and basically has hung fire. We don't know all of the different variables that are involved.
As the Connors ran to safety behind a stand of 5 redwood trees, they were unaware of the deadly conditions that had developed just a mile down the way in the tiny roadside community of Loma Mar. Tragically, the home of Cindy Peters and Paul Hansel was situated at the bottom of a draw, the classic track for a debris flow. Traveling at roughly 35 miles per hour down the gully, the landslide slammed full force into their home, obliterating the structure and all the couple's belongings. Cindy was mercifully thrown clear of danger, but her husband Paul was buried in the rubble.
When I was first told that there was a mountain slide that hit the house, or landslide, I didn't know what to think yet. You know, I just threw on my clothes and ran out the door and came over and saw what was left of their house on the road. It was just amazing. I mean, you know, there's 2-3 feet of mud and then debris packed on top of that, 4 or 5 feet tall on the shallower side, and then it just built up onto the hillside. If you were to count the number of yards that the whole house moved, you'd have to start from here and go down to the creek, which is 300 or 400 feet away, because it spread out that far. But the main portion of the house moved maybe 100 feet down the hill.
Junior and Ivor and myself and a couple other people running around trying to find him. And finally found him just below here in some trees. He's buried, partially buried. And got him on a backboard and took him down.
That was about 11:20, 11:30. And about 10 after 12, we started CPR on him. So the batteries on my handy-talkie had died that afternoon. So we didn't have any real communication. About a mile down the road towards Pescadero, there was about a 125-foot long slide up Pescadero Road that way. In front of the park, there was a couple of 4 or 5 foot redwoods down. And then there was a log jam that hit the bridge. It has a real interesting left turn in it now. So basically, we couldn't get out. Nobody else could get in. The engine was up Wur Road, working on another slide up by Connors, and they knew nothing about down here. So it was about an hour and a half before we got any first aid equipment in here.
If there was a way to get out, we would have done it. If there was a clear way to get him out of the general area and over the hill to a hospital, then we would have just taken him and gone. But there was, everything was blocked, so there was nowhere to go. Property can be replaced. Alive can't be replaced. And you just kind of lean on your friends and and family to get you through the death of a friend.
Paul Hansel died from severe internal trauma about 3 hours after he was found half buried in landslide debris. He had been a resident of Loma Mar for over 15 years and was 46 at the time of his death. Paul's tragic passing overshadowed the extensive property loss of his downhill neighbor Paul McLeod. Seconds after the slide hit Paul and Cindy's home, it swiped the corner of his own home, knocking it off its foundation and wiping out his garage. Everything inside, a car, motorcycles, boats, were carried across the road and down a steep embankment toward Pescadero Creek.
I'm planning on staying. I've got the house up on blocks now. We're planning on getting the county out to inspect it and then push it back and put it on another foundation. I think one of the biggest problems is the public coming over and, as soon as there's any type of a disaster, everybody wants to run out and look at it. I think that's one of the things that's been the hardest, trying to convince people just, stay away. We need help, but we don't. The last thing we need right now is sightseers and people going through, the entire contents of my garage are across the road. And I got people stopped down there somebody took off with fishing poles and all sorts of stuff. And it's like, this is cold, people. Knock it off. Everything's still sliding around here too, because it's so wet. And, a lot of these people, I followed somebody down the road Sunday who stops, there's a boulder about 25, 30 feet up on the side that's the size of a semi, and the guy sits there and looks at it, and it's like, get out of the way. I don't care if you want to get squashed, but don't squash me. And there's just no common sense around.
It may be helpful to let people know about debris flow hazards if, similar to flood warnings and whatnot. Maybe if people knew, if they were told on the radio or the television, yes, there's a chance of debris flows during this period of time because of heavy rain. Some people may listen, and there's always going to be people that aren't going to want to leave their houses because that's where they live. If people know ahead of time that they are in a hazardous area, and then there is the warning, then they'll be more likely to leave. But if a person just hears the warning and, they may be aware of a draw, but they'll think nothing of it. Oh, well, this hasn't slid in 30 or 40 years. Well, maybe it's due. So it has to coincide with the warning has to coincide with awareness of the area.
People who come into the California, into the San Francisco Bay Area from other regions of the country may never have been exposed to this type of hazard before. And there's a relatively short memory for the people who have lived through these storms here. It's like you have to get used to the idea that there can be earthquakes in the Bay Area. This is just one of the hazards of this region, just like if you move back to Kansas, you'll want to inform yourself about tornadoes and recognize the signs and listen to the weather advisories about tornadoes or hurricanes on the Gulf of Mexico. Every place has its hazards. This happens to be ours. USGS and the National Weather Service for a number of years operated a system to warn the public of impending debris flows during heavy rainfall, heavy storm events. This system operated for a decade, from 1986 to 1995, and was discontinued because of budget cuts and cuts in personnel. We're hoping that some form of such a system can be revived. Short term, the best way to predict debris flows is actually by monitoring the rainfall, because it takes a certain amount of rain to trigger these things. In the early part of the rainfall season, that is in October, November, the soils in the Bay Area are very dry from the summer dry months. So even if we have a very large storm, the rain will be falling on dry ground, the water will soak into the ground. It's very unlikely to trigger any landslides. You, in fact, usually don't get any runoff to speak of. Later in the season, when the hill slope soils have had a chance to wet up, we'll get to a point what we call saturation or antecedent condition, in which the soils have taken up about as much water as they're going to hold. Then once we reach this point of saturation, around New Year's in a normal year, then we know that future storms, really intense rainfall, will trigger the landslides that we're concerned about. Another thing we're exploring is having local communities such as Lomamar set up their own local systems where rain gauges are relatively inexpensive, they're relatively easy to read, and so local residents can be trained to once they're provided with accurate numbers for the rainfall thresholds, they can operate such a system themselves.
If it rained like it did, in all honesty, call it what you will, but I think I would be staying. I'd be really hard pressed to leave. I feel like if I'm here, I can do something up to the point where you know it's got the house or that, you know, I never felt, I felt I could go in the house and just take refuge and I'd be okay. We'd have major property damage, all of the above, but I would be okay. So I think it was more scary being out in it and the dangers you're gonna run into trying to fight it and being around the creeks and the slides. I think that's where your greatest worry is.
Some of your friends are telling you get out of there and you don't want to leave. We have animals here. To go somewhere would be no easy thing, and it's part of what you accept when you live out here. And there was a lot of media attention to El Niño's coming, but not a lot of media attention to preparation, especially in certain areas. So a lot of local emergency preparedness work with our local communities has been just around communication and with radios, ham radios, getting people trained. And we need to do a lot more on that level of just keeping communication open. And I think it's difficult to always be completely prepared for these kind of things, but if you live out here, you should have a plan.
Just being prepared and being able to do a few things for yourself is an absolute necessity to live out here. I don't think it's for everyone.
We thought we were prepared. In terms of, we knew that the slope was not active. It wasn't slipping. We knew the depth of the topsoil, the drainage. You could see the history of the area just by the fact that there was no bare earth anywhere. You know, nothing had slipped or slid. We felt prepared. No fear except for the possibility of trees coming down, and that is, I don't think there's anything to do about that. If, despite my best thoughts and hopes, it ever should occur again, I intend to put a debris wall on the back slope of my house, so I will be able to divert that to the side into a French drain and then off into the creek. If I could live here forever, this is the restaurant at the end of the universe for me. I could live here forever, but I'm not the only one who has to be taken into consideration. I had been able to talk my wife out of selling last year. I will not be able to talk her out of selling this year. We're going to stay on the coast, so we're not going to end up in a flatland environment. But I don't think I would have spent as much time and money having this place inspected if it hadn't been for the requirements of the bank. But next time it's going to be my own requirement. I definitely have to feel confident that there isn't something uphill that is going to come after me. And that's probably irrational. To duplicate the conditions that caused this, of course, are possible, but I don't think likely. But yes, I will be very, very much more careful in site selection for my next home.
The U.S. Geological Survey has released to each of the Bay Area counties maps showing where both the debris flow type of landslide are likely to occur, and maps showing where the deeper seated landslides are thought to occur. And these areas combine both slope information, topography, and geologic information, information about the bedrock under the slope. We have almost ideal conditions for generating landslides in much of the Bay Area, particularly the upland parts of San Mateo County, Santa Cruz Mountains in Santa Cruz County, Marin County in the East Bay Hills. In terms of prevention, preventing debris flows is a little more difficult than preventing landslides, in the deeper seated landslides, in that it's a little bit harder to figure out exactly where they're going to happen. But anything you can do to keep the slope well drained will help. Gutters, storm drains, that sort of thing. Some people put plastic up. This is of questionable utility except for small areas. A very practical thing that you can do is if you have any culverts or ditches or any kind of drainage works on your land, make sure those are clean out at the beginning of the season. You don't want to have any kind of water impounded on your property. Another thing that can be done is to put in something called a French drain. In Southern California, they've done quite a bit of this kind of drainage. They also put up retaining walls and deflection walls. And deflection walls can be effective so long as that isn't deflecting the flow of the mud away from your property, so long as you're not deflecting it onto your neighbor. So there's a number of things that can be done, but they're all expensive and they're all risky, and none of them are guaranteed. These are useful measures to protect your property, but to protect your life, we recommend you simply evacuate for the few hours, the overnight, or the few hours that the storm is at its height, and that way, if something happens, and it does destroy your house, at least you haven't lost any of your family members. You can rebuild or replace any property. You cannot rebuild or replace life.
We physically could live in the house now, but I think a lot of it's the psychological part. We still have rain to come, and no one has really looked at the hillside other than us, and so we're just not comfortable staying here knowing that maybe that hill still could, parts of it could slide, and the mental strain, every time you hear a rumble or a roar, you want to get up and run.
We're going to wait till it dries up before we move back.
The big thing is, where do you take this amount of dirt? So that's a big expense as far as trucking the dirt out of here. So there'll be things to work on a little at a time.
We started with a shovel, so it seems kind of pointless, but we've had people coming over and help us dig out.
And my employment, the guys that I work with have started a fund, and so there is a lot of help being done, and financial end of it will help.
And we have a mess here, but we have a lot more than a lot of people that are dealing with losing everything.
And people in La Honda and other areas that have lost their homes are sliding,
and we can downsize. I just want to get my bicycle back. That's the one thing I want to replace. I miss that.
As residents of the Santa Cruz Mountains cleared away the dirt and devastation brought by the shallow, fast-moving debris flows, problems were just developing in the scenic drive area of La Honda, where an entire neighborhood was underlain by a slow-moving, deep-seated landslide. Although residents of Scenic Drive had noticed subtle signs of earth movement before the storm of the 2nd, the intense rains of early February had added weight to the slide mass and reduced its strength, accelerating movement of the landslide downslope.
I got a phone call from my mother. She had noticed for about 2 days before Monday, when the storm came in on the 2nd of February, the doors were starting to stick, and she just figured it was moisture. Then she started noticing on Wednesday the 4th that there were small cracks in the driveway. I'm not sure if you can see the cracks here, but they were a little bit smaller than this, and it was something new, so I did put little markers in came back 3 hours later, my markers had fallen through. That's when I decided to go in and look at the sticking doors. And the doors weren't so much sticking as they were pulling apart and distorting. And at that point, we realized we probably had a problem. And we called a geologist. At this point now, the cracks were like 6 inches. He suggested removing the bolts from the mud sill on the one side of the house to prevent the house from torquing. So we did that, and we got a contractor out here to basically start shoring up the house. Over the next 4 days, it was very obvious that this was not going to save the house. The house started moving quite rapidly, anywhere from 4 to 6 inches a day. The last 4 days, this area seems to be rising a little bit slower, or maybe dropping a little bit slower. It's about 1 foot to 1.5 feet a day. The driveway is about 2 feet a day, and it seems like it's still continuing to move. It hasn't slowed its progress at all. And we also noticed neighbors starting to get involved. 2 days after my mother had called me, that Wednesday the 4th, Bill Hill's house up here, he started noticing the back door sticking. He noticed cracks in his driveway and in his garage, and he started moving out as well.
When I came here, the house was still under construction. Well, it's a ground-up remodel. And sort of in the back here, it's all rock. You know, it's fractured rock, but I said, well, you know, if it's going to be on anything, this is probably the best place for it to be. And so that gave me some confidence that the house would be okay. And that was sort of a pivotal point of, you know, that it was hard and solid. The foundation had been here for about 50 years, so I figured it has to be okay. But geologically, 50 years is not very long. We have been recognizing very subtle changes long before the storm on the 2nd of February. Just tucked it away as a bit of information. Then the storm of the 2nd, a few days later, the cracks appeared in the Moffat's driveway. And it was maybe a day after that, the back door to the garage was just slightly misaligned, didn't latch properly. I fixed that. The next day, it still didn't latch properly. So I concluded that we're really on the move. Maybe it's a ½ inch a day, but we're on the move. And then cracks appeared in the street. So I told my wife, this is it, we got to get out because the street's going to collapse. So we went and hurriedly got trucks and storage and just got all our stuff out.
It's so unreal. I still can't believe it. My parents bought this house about 5 years ago. It's going to be a retirement home. At the time that we bought it, we were told that it was a possible or probable slide area. And we signed a disclaimer at that point. But we were also told that it had a 30-pier foundation, 20 feet deep, and probably would never slide. And so we did buy the house. We repainted last year, put the green shutters on. The interior's been all fixed up, new floors. My mother's quite a garden. The whole area is garden. You can see what's left of the garden. It's just, she loves gardening. We put everything they have in this house. It's a $400,000 home. The insurance will pay $2,000 for moving expenses, but basically that's it. The house will probably never be retrievable from this state, and they'll never be able to build on this lot again because this is no longer a probable slide area. This is a definite slide area. One geologist said it's a very slow-moving slide, that the house probably will not go down the hill or slide down the hill, but basically will continue to do this drop, lift, and slowly tear itself apart where it'll actually collapse in on itself. And that seems to be paying out. If you notice Bill's house, that's exactly what it's doing. There is a slow movement down the hill with Bill's, and there's a slow movement with my parents down the hill, but it's like maybe 1 inch, 2 inches a day. It's mainly this drop and lift, which is the biggest motion that we've noticed.
Deep-seated landslides can be very large. Deep-seated landslides can cover tens of square miles in some places. The landslide here on Scenic Drive in La Honda is a relatively small landslide by geologic standards, but of course it has tremendous impact on the people that live here. There are about 10 houses involved in one way or another, and a number of other houses around the edges of the slide. But the slide is relatively small, maybe 7 to 10 acres.
The landslide is slowly moving downhill under the influence of gravity, like a thin slab sliding downhill.
It's slipping on a weak plane at its base, which we've recognized about 25 to 30 feet below the surface of the slide. And it can move up to feet per day, potentially for months, depending on the amount of water in the slide and the steepness of the slope. The body of the landslide is deforming internally as material slides down the hill. It rumples up like a rug. It breaks apart like the bread crust on top of a rising loaf of bread. And as it advances down slope, it starts to rise up and over the pre-existing landscape. There are a number of things that can be done to try and control and limit the damage from the landslides. One obvious thing is to control the drainage, control the amount of water that's getting into the slide. We've had crews out here for the past couple of days digging ditches up on the crown of the slide and lining those ditches with plastic and directing drainage away from the headscarp through pipes down to a collecting area where the water is moved off of the slide. The county has also come in and drilled 3 holes into the slide, about 24 inches in diameter and 20 to 30 feet deep. Those holes go down into the slide mass and through the slide plane, and they've been filled with perforated pipe and gravel, and pumps have been installed to pump the water out of the slide mass.
I've never seen anything like this. There are small slides along the roads almost every winter, but nothing of this size or magnitude. One edge of the slide is just on the other side of our property line, which is 50 to 60 feet from where we're standing. From what I understand about this type of slide, it's relatively slow moving. It's not life-threatening, so we're not concerned about suddenly this whole mass of land letting loose and funneling down the hill. It's sort of a gradual, incremental change that we see. The anxiety is, I guess, where will it stop and when will it stop?
When the slide began to happen, the fissure had not crossed over this empty lot yet, and people's houses were beginning to slide, and then day by day we would watch that fissure coming across the lot, probably a few inches at a time, and we didn't know where it was going to stop, or if it was going to come and hit the garage, or we just had no idea. And then it disappeared behind this big debris of wood pile over there, and never came out on the other side.
There's still wet weather ahead of us, and we've been told that sometimes these things grow, and we just have to wait to see what it does.
I try not to think about it and just go about my day-to-day life, and but you look up and you just see, the houses boarded up and the people working out there, and you feel the lifelessness of that area now, where all the people are gone. We want our neighbors back.
Yeah. It's sad to see what our friends and neighbors have gone through with this. These are devastating losses for homeowners, and they're basically uncovered. And I guess it's somewhat surprising that with the numbers of homes that are susceptible or being built and have been built in areas that are susceptible to landslides, that there isn't at least an insurance pool that could underwrite such a policy.
We have friends. See, I'm relatively recently married, and my wife grew up here in the Bay Area. She has a lot of very close friends in the Bay Area. So we set up housekeeping in a bedroom, living out of a suitcase in their house. And we'll be able to make it. We're very lucky. We got our stuff out. Our animals weren't injured or hurt, or no one was killed. And our problem is a financial one, pretty much. It's just a financial one, and we'll be able to figure that out one way or another. The slide is moving relentlessly A mass like this, once it gets on the move, it takes a whole lot of energy to stop it. This property, my lot, I don't think can be stabilized without stabilizing the entire slide. And I don't know whether collectively, if all the homes are even worth the cost of attempting to stabilize the slide. I guess homeowners have to be aware of where their house is. Uniform code for building has to be robust enough, and so that things like this, so houses won't be built on land that is likely to move.
People who buy in a slide area, they need to understand more than just the probability that they may be in a slide area. They need to be told that in unusual rain situations, that a house, no matter how well constructed, no matter how modern, no matter what kind of techniques they did to build a foundation, still has a real potential for this kind of development.